This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast dealing with the dark feminine. My name's Breach Burke, I'm your host, and this week, in our continual look at sort of Afro-Caribbean, Brazilian feminine figures that would be considered to be dark in some fashion, this week we are going to look at Erzulie. Now, Erzulie is actually a family of loa, or spirits. We had talked about Maman Brigitte, and Maman Brigitte is part of the Gede family of loa. This is, so Erzulie is actually its own class or family of loa. And they are associated with water, femininity, and feminine bodies. And as we will see, the different Erzulie who we talk about are quite interesting to me, because they really get into, within one group of feminine figures, the whole concept of femininity with a capital F, which is usually what I'm referring to when I talk about the feminine. When I talk about the feminine, I mean, yes, we could talk about women or women's rights or toxic masculinity or things like that. But when we talk about the feminine with the capital F, we're talking about all of those attributes that we tend to associate with the feminine, whether it has to do with women in particular or not. And also, as we see in these particular religious traditions, how they also mix in with things like colonialism, how that, with the effects of the slave trade, the ways in which, say French or Spanish interests, particularly with the Catholic religion and so forth, end up influencing the African religion and turning it into something different. Again, because there's the Yoruba religion, but then this is also, we are now back looking at Haitian Voodoo. And the Voodoo tradition, it definitely is kind of a unique mixture of Creole and, which is sort of the, that French, African, and even somewhat Spanish influence that you see in places like New Orleans, for example, and other places, and of course within the Caribbean itself. There's definitely this tradition that is unique to this part of the world, because a lot of it did come out of the slave trade and out of colonialism. And so you see in the gods and the spirits that are portrayed there, you see this kind of monotheistic tendency, which may have also been there, by the way, in African religions. There's that unique blend of having sort of a monotheistic type creator god, but having all of these intermediary spirits that move between. And they're the ones that interact with us and interact with the world. So it's kind of a unique blending of monotheism with what we might think of as animism of a type. And it does so, and the deities themselves will take on attributes often of their colonial oppressors, you might say. And as we're going to see with Erzulie Freda. But what I'm most interested in, I'm going to talk about Erzulie, who she is, and about a little bit about the Voodoo nations, I guess they're called, and we're going to talk about the different Erzulie and their characteristics. But what I also want to talk about is what these figures actually imply in terms of the feminine, and for that, because to me there's what we think of as the spirit of the Erzulie is actually, it has a lot to do with what we think of as the qualities of what Jung would call the anima. And I probably will read a little bit from Jung too on this on this feminine idea and how it tends to present itself in gods. Now, of course, Jung isn't talking about the voodoo gods, but nonetheless, what he's saying is relevant. So let's begin here. Now, the Erzulie, okay. As I mentioned, they're associated with water, femininity, and feminine bodies. They are one of the only group of spirits directly tied to these characteristics, and those who become possessed, because as we know in Voodoo, The ceremonies involve, drawing the veve and doing certain rituals, making the offerings, and having the actual loa possess the body of the priest or priestess who is doing the ceremony. Excuse me, or the sorcerer, or whoever that is. So the people, those who are possessed by the Erzulie are either women or what they call masisi, which are feminine men, or what they're calling queer or homosexual. Those are the ones. So again, right away you see that this is associated with femininity with a capital F, not necessarily with biological sex. Okay, so so we're talking about there's different Erzulie, and we're going to talk here about the Rada aspect and then what they call the Petro aspect. Now let me just say something about what those are, because I don't think that's necessarily understood by default. Okay, let me just find my note here on this. Yes, each loa is identified with one of these nations, as I'd mentioned, and is bound to his or her nation, just as humans in Haitian society are linked by ties of family and kinship. Now, this is one of the scholars. Murphy identifies 8 nations as the most significant: Rada, Petro, Nago or Yoruba, Ibo or Igbo, Wangol or Angola, Senegal or Senegal, and Guinean or Guinea, and Congo. The two most inclusive groups and the largest nations are Rada, which is home to the wise and benevolent spirits that accompany the slaves to the New World from ancestral Africa, and Petro, the fierce and tempestuous spirits drawn from Central Africa and creolized in Haiti, whose rites, born of the rage of the evil fate suffered by Africans transported to the New World, speak to the wrath against the brutality of displacement and enslavement. Folk tradition maintains that it was at a Petro ceremony that leaders of the Haitian Revolution swore their loyalty oath. As the different congregations have chosen from among the various rites and practices of these nations to elaborate their own particular forms of worship, they have formed what this Murphy calls a liturgical mosaic, characteristic of the mutability and variety of voodoo practices. Okay. Now, this is from a book called Creole Religions of the Caribbean, which is actually a collection of essays. And the particular essay that I'm reading from is on Haitian voodoo. It's chapter 4 in this book. And I just want to see if I have an author attribution here. It's New York University Press, and it's Marguerite Fernandez Olmos and Elizabeth Paravicini Gebert are the authors of this, or at least the editors of this work. Okay, so it's an introduction from Voodoo and Santeria to Obea and Espiritismo. So that's what this is about. So that's where that's my source on that. Okay. So let's start talking about the different Erzulie from this particular loa. Erzulie Freda Dahomey, the Rada aspect of Erzulie, is the Haitian African spirit of love, beauty, jewelry, dancing, luxury, and flowers. She wears 3 wedding rings, one for each. They're saying husband here, although in other traditions she's not married. Dambala, Agwe, and Ogun. I don't know if I'm saying the last one right. Her symbol is a heart. Her colors are pink, blue, white, and gold. Her favorite sacrifices include jewelry, perfume, sweet cakes, and liqueurs. Coquettish and very fond of beauty and finery, Erzulie Freda is femininity and compassion embodied, yet she also has a darker side. She is seen as jealous and spoiled, and within some voodoo circles considered to be lazy. During ritual possession, she may enter the body of either a man or a woman. She enjoys games of flirtation and seduces people without distinguishing between sexes. In Christian iconography, she is often identified with the Mater Dolorosa, as well as another loa named Maîtresse Izili. She is conceived as never able to attain her heart's most fervent desire. Now that's interesting. That's a motif that I want us to sort of bookmark in our mind there. She is never able to attain her heart's most fervent desire. For this reason, she always leaves a service in tears. Common synchronizations include Ialore Oshun, that is the goddess Ocean, as she relates to the Yoruba goddess of erotic love, gold, and femininity. Okay, so that's the one Erzulie. Let me give you a moment here. 1 second. Okay, sorry. My phone is deciding to go off, so I decided to put that into silent mode so we don't hear that. Okay. Okay, so this is the one Erzulie. She's one associated with femininity. And as we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes, her her interest in finery and wearing fine clothes, and she speaks French. You know, the things that she has, it definitely has taken on the attributes of, you know, those who have, not of the enslaved population, but of their captors, if you will. So she definitely, so there's definitely, and like I said, this Mater, association with Mater Dolorosa as well. The idea of the mother who has sort of the pieta, you know, sort of the very sad mother who has like the knife through the heart. Okay. We can think of like the Three of Swords imagery, for example, in tarot. She has this, so she's very beautiful. She's very seductive. She is a goddess of love, but there is also this idea of unrequited love, or of not getting what one desires. And here they're mentioning her having 3 husbands, but as we'll see, she's also now considered to have 1. Now, I do have one other thing I want to say about Erzulie Freda here before I move on to the next Erzulie. Okay. So here, this is also from the other book I was referring to. She's a goddess of love and luxury, a flirtatious, light-skinned, okay, she's mulatto as well, Creole, known as the personification of feminine beauty and grace. She has, as Métraux describes her, all the characteristics of a pretty mulatto. She is coquettish, sensual, pleasure-loving, and extravagant. Her veve invokes images of sensuality, luxury, and unrequited love. Yes, because you have the heart with the knife through it as well in her veve. And it says, every Haitian unfo contains a room or corner of a room devoted to Erzulie. She adores fine clothes, red and blue dresses particularly, jewels, perfumes, and lace, all of which are kept on her altar, together with the basin, towel, soap, comb, lipstick, and other articles indispensable to her toilette. Those mounted by Erzulie, remember when they possess the priest, priestess, or sorcerer, that are known as a cheval, or a horse. You know, the spirit mounts them and rides them, as it were. Those mounted by her, whether male or female, make their entrance into the pedestal dressed to captivate, walking slowly, swinging hips, ogling men, or pausing for a kiss or caress. Erzulie Freda's colors are white and pink, and a rare instance of product placement in Haitian voodoo, her favorite brand of perfume is said to be Anai Anai. Offerings to Erzulie Freda include heavily sweetened drinks made with orange syrup or grenadine, rice cooked in cinnamon milk, or bananas fried in sugar, and mild cigarettes. Erzulie Freda, the douce loa of the Rada rite of Dahomey, is unhappy in love and is often represented by the chromolithograph of the Mater Dolorosa in familiar depiction with her heart pierced by a knife. In Divine Horseman, Maya Deren, a very famous filmmaker, describes how she herself was possessed by Erzulie. As sometimes in dreams, so here I can observe myself, can note with pleasure how the full hem of my white skirt plays with the rhythms, can watch as if in a mirror how the smile begins with the softening of lips, spreads imperceptibly into a radiance which, surely, is lovelier than any I have ever seen. It is when I turn as if to a neighbor to say, "Look, see how lovely that is," and see that others are removed to a distance, withdrawn to a circle which is already watching, that I realize, like a shaft of terror struck through me, that it is no longer myself that I watch. Okay, so that's interesting. Maya Deren, by the way, her work, if you can, her movies are a little hard to get a hold of. There may be a few of them on YouTube. Actually, the library where I work, we did actually buy the Maya Deren collection of like 7 short films. It was like $100. It's quite expensive, but her films are fascinating. That's kind of a side note there. But so she talks about this aspect of Erzulie. This is Erzulie Freda. Now the other Erzulie, Erzulie Dantor. Okay, now she's the queen of the Petro nation, as we mentioned, which has to do with the harsher aspect of this of these deities, and she is the mother of Tijan Petro. She is often depicted as a fearsome black woman, protectively holding Tijan Petro in her arms. She's particularly fierce protector of women, children, and the neglects of society. Okay, so we see actually kind of an overlap there with someone like Maman Brigitte, who deals with the neglected dead, but she is dealing with those in living society who are neglected. Okay, she's the Loa Poen, in contrast with Erzulie Freda, who will bless you with material riches. Erzulie Dantor will give you the spiritual knowledge needed to navigate through this material reality. Erzulie Dantor's wealth lasts and can be passed on from one generation to another, whereas Erzulie Freda, in any of her jealous fits, can deprive overnight of the gains she helped you to achieve. Now, they're mentioning that this Erzulie Dantor is often portrayed to resemble the Black Madonna of Chthonia. We saying that right? Chthonia. Okay. As she is represented as being dark-skinned with 2 scars on her face. Her colors are red, black, and blue. Okay, something else to note. Her favorite sacrifices include black pigs, griot, which is seasoned fried pork, blood, 7 stabs of the sword, and rum. Okay, and Tejean Petro is her son, and Jean Petro is her lover or husband. Okay, and again, there's another tradition where the women are actually both unmarried. So, one, because she's, a seductress who continually wants a variety of men, and in this case, because, she is potentially considered to be independent and not in need of being obedient to someone else or being beholden to someone else. Okay, so here we talk about the Rada, Erzulie Freda, vain and flirty goddess of love. Her horses, the possessed ones, tend to cry tears of longing and regret. She is syncretized with Our Lady of Sorrows, the Virgin Mary as suffering mother, Mater Dolorosa. Now, again, there's that Catholic influence, that Catholic colonial influence here. Erzulie Mansur represents maternal love and protects children from harm. And Grana Erzulie represents the wisdom granted by experience and maturity and grandmotherly kindness and love. She is syncretized with Saint Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary. Okay. So you see not only love in its more pleasant aspect, but you also see this maternal, loving maternal element, that aspect of the feminine that tends to be more emphasized in the West, or tends to be more idealized in the West. Now, the Petro, we have Erzulie Dantor. She's the protects women and children, deals revenge against those who wrong them. Erzulie Balian, who silences hearts. She keeps secrets and ensures that secrets will not be revealed. Helps people to forget past loves and overcome passionate emotions. Okay, and she is syncretized with the Immaculate Heart. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to say this way. Erzulie Mapiangwe, I think is how it's said, deals with the pain of childbirth and the protection of unborn and newborn babies. Her horses tend to get in a fetal position, a birthing position, and cry tears of pain. Excuse me, I have too much of a cough today. Common syncretization is as the Virgin and Infant of Prague, which wears matching velvet robes and gold crowns. And then Erzulie Gay Rouge, okay, this one is important, or Gay Rouge, red-eyed Erzulie, takes revenge on unfaithful lovers, and her horses cry tears of bitter sadness. Okay, so she's another, she also has a little bit more of a fearful aspect. And Erzulie Toho aids the jealous or slighted in love. Her horses cry tears of anger. And there's a few other ones, but, yeah, just a few more notes that are probably a little repetitive. Petro writes arose in the New World during slavery, and Petroloa are characteristically dark and powerful and called bitter, or anme. Erzulie is a love goddess who developed during a time when slave owners broke up families and separated husbands and wives at will. She is sometimes considered a triple goddess. She has 3 husbands, the Dambala, the sky god, Agwe, a sea god, and Ogun, the god of fire and iron. And she wears 3 wedding bands because of this. Okay. Myths of her can be traced all the way back to West Africa. The arts, especially dance, are her domain. Rivers, streams, lakes, and waterfalls are hers, and she can cure womb-related problems with her cool waters. The fan she is holding in most depictions is from Osogbo, Nigeria, and belongs to a priestess of Ocean who is the mediator between divine or natural world and the world of people. The cross in the circle indicating the meeting of the 2 worlds. In her petronation aspect as Erzulie Dantor, she is depicted as a scarred and buxom black woman holding a child protectively in her arms. She is a protector of women and children. A common syncretic depiction of Erzulie Dantor is Saint Jeanne d'Arc, or Joan of Arc, who is displayed carrying or supporting a sword. Another is the Black Madonna, who I mentioned. And of course, I did a podcast with Ellen Jones on Black Madonnas. So, so these tend to be very powerful manifestations of the mother goddess or of earth energy. And she is represented as being dark-skinned. Tejan Petro is her son, and this says sometimes considered her lover or husband, but I believe her husband is Jean Petro. So, okay. So, with regard to Erzulie Dantor, or Danto, now, again, back to the Creole religion book, she says that she is the second most popular manifestation of Erzulie is that of Erzulie Danto, a dark-skinned, hard-working peasant woman habitually dressed in blue, red, or multicolored fabrics. Like Erzulie Freda, she has no husband. See, here they're saying they have no spouses. But has a daughter, Anai, to whom she is devoted. Now, that's also different, because we hear about the daughter here, but we hear about the son in the other depiction. Okay, so, probably there's elements of both, depending, maybe it depends on tradition or what is emphasized. The scratches on her cheek are said to be a reminder of the bitter rivalry between the two Erzulies. Her alter ego is the knife-wielding Petro Loa Erzulie de Rouge, Erzulie of the Red Eyes. Okay, so here, the other one they're saying she is merely sad. This one is knife-wielding, so she's much more angry. And again, the offerings, again, are scents like Florida water, clarin or raw rum, fried pork, and unfiltered camels. As the more mundane peasant incarnation of Erzulie Freda as a mother, she is associated not with the Mater Dolorosa, but with Madonnas with children like Our Lady of Mount Carmel, or Black Madonnas like Mater Salvatoris. Okay, so now we see, we have two different sort of voodoo nations we're talking about here, the Rada and the Petro. And we're talking about gods with very different qualities and characteristics. So, and we're talking about a purely feminine Loa type, okay? The Erzulie are purely have to do with femininity. You might think about, in Hinduism, the way the Mahavidyas are the manifestations of the feminine in almost all possible forms. This particular characterization, we see two different forms, which essentially show us the what people consider to be the quote-unquote lighter aspects of femininity and the darker ones. Okay, they're both embodied there. And what's interesting is with the scars, there seems to be a portrayal of these are almost two characteristics that are at war with each other. What is interesting about both of them, though, and again, probably it's not so much that they are opposing as that they can come into conflict with each other. Because certainly women, there's a way that women are said, or if we're talking about the way that femininity is expressed through women, let me put it that way. There's a way that women are kind of expected or supposed to behave, particularly when it comes to the opposite sex. And so you tend to have these two different, even in the West when we have these sort of Wiccan idea of maiden, mother, and crone, all right? What you're looking at here, Erzulie Freda tends to represent what you might think of as more of that maiden aspect, maybe somewhat of the mother. But then you have Erzulie Dantor or Dantor, who represents more of that, the mother to the crone aspect. And the differences between the three, the maiden tends to be young, tends to be sort of, like I said, fresh, seductive, interested in, looking pretty, looking nice, trying to be attractive to, and again, really here, it's very liminal because they were also pointing out that Erzulie can, quote unquote, marry women as well. So there's, so really the gender thing does actually all get kind of subverted and mixed up. I'm going to talk about that in a second from another piece. But Erzulie is, So you have this idea of this young, coquettish, seductive girl who's attractive to men and loves that, but also notice that there's another piece to that, and that is the sadness, never quite getting, like, there's that unrequited aspect of it, unrequited love. And that sort of embodies the experience of, let's just for argument's sake, heterosexual girls, okay, growing up, when they go through puberty and go through their teen years. There may be a fair amount of experience that they gain, and love experience, and the ecstasy of sex and love and all that. But there's also a fair amount of rejection and loss and grief when the love goes away or the lover goes away. It's not, there's that sense of, and you will, I don't know if I tend to see it as much now. I feel now, like, in the culture, there's more of a culture of women as being independent, but the idea of, trying to keep your man or trying to do this or that that's an idea that's not, I don't want to say it's gone away. It's just that when you look at popular culture, there seems to be a shift in how, women are portrayed in that kind of a drama. Okay. It seems to me now that it's not so much like, the devastated, woman who's, pining away in her room because she's lost her loved one. There's not that I'm sure that there's people who become very emotional and for whom that can still happen or be actually a real thing in their life. It's not, we as a culture, there tends to be stronger portrayals of women now, more independent ones where, you lose somebody, but it's not like this is the end of your life. It's like, it's something you go through. Now, when we talk about the crone aspect, though, we are talking about the experienced woman who has gone through it all and has seen it all, and is not necessarily swayed by the promises of young love, okay? Because those are, frankly, we know, if you've been married, you know that marriage and dating are very different things, okay? When you're dating, it's a whole different ballgame, and you actually, archetypally, I talk about this in my love mythology course, or my love mythology lecture, I should say, which those I'm actually going to be re-recording and putting out very soon in the new year. And in fact, by the time you're listening to this, the course is probably going to be up. But there tends to be two things. There's the anima figure, and then there's the mother figure. Okay, and when you are dating someone, we're just talking about a man-woman relationship. Obviously, there's homosexual relationships. There's relationships, there's lesbian relationships. There are, relationships between transgender people of however that, there's attractions that are not necessarily just man-woman. Okay. But even understanding that, even if we just look at the quote unquote, at that quote unquote heteronormative idea, we have this idea that, there's the kind of things that when you first fall in love with somebody, all the chemicals come up, all the hormones, and, you're just absolutely lusting after that person, and you just want to, be by them all the time. It's like, you see these people who look like they're, accessories to each other. But that once you get married, so in that stage, you are the anima. Okay, if you're the female in that one, you are the projection of the man's anima. That person is projecting the power of their soul image onto you, and it's like you are almost like that goddess. But the anima, as Jung describes it, is actually a very complicated figure, who can be the absolute height of creativity and also can bring about the worst suffering in a man, because as he would said in one of his things, the anima injects her poison. It can be, and it can potentially lead you. It takes your logic away, for one thing. You're not moving, because the logical realm is the realm of the masculine, and frequently when you are possessed by the anima, as it were, or you've projected the anima onto your lover or partner, that person takes on some kind of an ideal image that isn't really them. When you get married, that often tends to shift. The female tends to become more of the mother archetype, and the man automatically will shift into gears, and his wife will become what his mother was to him. Okay, so whereas before it might just have been about love and romance and dating, then they get married, and then it becomes about like, oh, okay, are you gonna, clean the house and iron my shirts and do this, and, whatever people expected from their mother, okay, at least in these sort of traditional environments. I know many stories, and again, I talk about it in my love myth class, so I don't want to derail here with that. But there's a very different image of the two, and so when you're looking at the crone, you're looking at the older woman who's beyond childbearing years, who's beyond love, and has seen it all, and maybe there may even be a bitterness about it, but nonetheless, there's a cynicism for sure. There's this idea that everything that all the blossoms of young love, it's like, yeah, well, that doesn't, where does that lead? That doesn't go anywhere ultimately. Ultimately, it's something that blooms and then it dies. So the crone not only is a reminder of physical death, but it's a reminder of the death of that sort of thing too. So we see all these aspects kind of embodied in these two figures. And so therefore, like more of a crone-like image, which is where we tend to see the dark feminine, is more about the woman who is not swayed by love and falling in love and seduction. Not that sexuality can't be part of it, because sexuality is also considered to be extremely dangerous. So that is one aspect of it, the danger of female sexuality, and particularly for men, or whoever's portraying the masculine in this case, the way that they are sucked in by that archetype. But there's also the woman who's like, yeah, okay, I've heard this song and dance before. As we like to say, been there, done there, got the t-shirt. And so there's definitely more of a cynicism about love. And so that tends to be the person who comes along to warn the young woman about, the potential negatives of what she's getting into. Which, maybe that's kind of a killjoy. And again, a lot of it depends on your attitude. If somebody is very much into sex and love and seduction and all those things, it's fine as long as they understand that they don't combine it with some kind of this is going to go on forever kind of idea. Even if they marry the person and they love each other for the rest of their lives, the relationship is going to be different from what it was when they were dating. Okay. So, so I want to say a little bit more about these aspects of Erzulie in terms of this masculine and feminine thing. Okay, so this is from a article called by Joan Diane called "Erzulie: A Woman's History of Haiti," and this is in the what is this? It's from Indiana University Press, Research in African Literatures. Okay, that's where this is from. Okay, so she says, Erzulie, the goddess spirit or loa of love in Voodoo, tells a story of women's lives that has not yet been told. A goddess was born on the soil of Haiti who has no precedent in Yorubaland or Dahomey. In her varying incarnations, she has many faces. She bears the extremes of colonial history. Whether the pale and elegant Erzulie Freda or the cold-hearted savage Erzulie Rouge, she dramatizes a specific historiography of women's experience in Haiti and throughout the Caribbean. In describing Erzulie, most writers have turned to analogy. She's Venus, she's the Virgin. What if we decided to forego such external impositions and those dichotomies, such as pure and impure, evil or beneficent, and instead tried to talk about the continuing presence of Erzulie through those relationships and events particular to women in Haiti, whether black, mulatto, or white? Although most ethnographers, whether Haitian or foreign, present Erzulie in her three emanations, as Erzulie Freda, the lady of luxury and love, as Erzulie Dantor, the black woman of passion identified in Catholic chromolithographs with the Mater Salvatoris, her heart pierced with a dagger, and as Erzulie Rouge, the red-eyed militant of fury and vengeance. Erzulie bears witness to a far more complicated lineage. Okay? Indeed, in ritual practices, there are slippages and uneasy alliances between these apparently antagonistic gods. And yes, of course, because the reality is that they're not quite as separate as you might think. Now, she says here, now this is the part I was looking at, unlike Western religions that depend on dualism, such as matter and spirit, body and soul, for their perpetuation and power, Voodoo unsettles and subverts such apparent oppositions. That subversion becomes most evident when we turn to the question of gender distinction and color division. Erzulie Freda, the Mulatresse Blanche, is the lover of Ugon, a very black god of war, often identified with, I'm not sure I'm going to say this right, Papa Dessalines, I think. But she also wears the rings of Dambala, the white snake god of the sweet waters and the god of the sea, who is figured as white. Though a woman, Erzulie vacillates between her attraction for the two sexes. She holds her servitors in between two irreconcilables, in between the supposed antithetical constructions of masculinity and femininity. She's not androgynous, for she deliberately encases herself in the trappings of what has been constituted in a social world, especially that of the Frenchified elites, as femininity. Erzulie thus goes beyond false dichotomizing as she prescribes and responds to multiple and apparently incoherent directives. She takes on a garb of femininity and even speaks excellent French in order to confound and discard the culturally defined roles of men and women. If voodoo remains a locus of feminine strength, with women and men in equal practice, it can be so only because it ever reconstitutes specifically gendered stereotypes. Erzulie demands of her servitors abstention from sex on her sacred days. But Erzulie, quote-unquote, marries women as well. Everything written about Erzulie can be contradicted. She is, some will tell you, the loa of lust most often prayed to by prostitutes. A goddess served by the Haitian elite or young virgins, Erzulie is also sought after by those with homosexual tendencies. The indeterminacy of the goddess, whose libidiners between men and women enacts a fantasy of l'amoureuse, a play that is ever determined by precise sociocultural models. And here that she talks about a voodoo priestess who says every woman is an emanation of Erzulie, okay? And that's where we get to the idea of the anima. And so this article goes on to talk about, getting away from the idea of looking at women as, objects or icons, because they're not, because as we can see, it's far more complicated than that. I want to go back to the Jung piece for a minute. And this is from Jung's essay called The Psychological Aspects of the Kore. Kore being Persephone, the queen of the underworld, who was supposedly, who's abducted by Hades away from her mother Demeter. And then there's the whole idea of Demeter's search for her daughter. But of course, Persephone or Kore has eaten the pomegranate seed in the underworld, which is also a symbol of sexuality. And so she remains with her husband. Highly symbolic. I have another podcast on that. But here's what Jung has to say about the Kore as a type. And we see this to some degree in Erzulie Freda, okay? So first of all, they talks about the maiden sacrifice, okay? The way, the idea of the virgin chained up by the dragon or so on and so forth. And, and we don't see this with Erzulie Freda, but the idea of the woman who is, perpetually going after something she cannot attain. There's a certain element of that in here. He talks about the descent into the underworld of the virginal feminine. Okay. Where he says, often bloody, cruel, and even obscene orgies to which the innocent child falls victim. Sometimes it's a true Nikia, which is an underworld journey, a descent into Hades, and a quest for the treasure hard to attain, occasionally connected with orgiastic sexual rites or offerings of menstrual blood to the moon. Oddly enough, the various tortures, obscenities are carried out by an Earth Mother. So here we're talking about the innocent maiden, who's this embodiment of innocence and love, young love, and all that sort of thing. But we're also talking about the cruelties of the Earth Mother, which we see in the darker aspect. There are drinkings of blood, we're reading more about Jung now, drinkings of blood and bathings in blood, also crucifixions. The maiden who crops up in case histories differs not inconsiderably from the vaguely flower-like Kore, in that the modern figure is more sharply delineated and not nearly so unconscious, as their following examples will show. Okay. Now, he goes on to talk about Demeter and Hecate, which, again, are two different manifestations very similarly. Like Demeter has to do with fertility and life and love and the earth. Hecate has to do with the underworld, the secret and the dark. Okay. He says, he talks about their in the way that they are oversized or life-size mothers. In this paragraph, he says, the Earth Mother is always chthonic, and is occasionally related to the moon, either through the blood sacrifice already mentioned, through a child sacrifice. Hang on a minute, I think I lost my page. Or else because she is adorned with a sickle moon, and I will note in the case of Kali, an actual sickle. In pictorial or plastic representations, the mother is dark, deepening to black or red. Okay, so we notice that divine mothers are associated with black and red, these being her principal colors. and with a primitive or animal expression of face. In form, she not infrequently resembles a Neolithic ideal of things like the Venus of Willendorf, for example, he mentions. He says, the Earth Mother plays an important part in a woman's unconscious, for all her manifestations are described as powerful. Yeah, we think of Shakti as well. This shows that in such cases, the Earth Mother element in the conscious mind is abnormally weak and requires strengthening. Yeah, and there it is. The feminine is something that's very weak, regardless of what we are biologically, the feminine has always been the weaker thing in our culture. We have been very much encouraged through education and through everything else to cultivate the masculine. And the feminine, and we've kind of tended to only really promote aspects of the feminine that tend to be this, the more pleasing ones, shall we say. And we feel like we have to control or somehow conquer or live in fear of the ones that are darker. So interesting expression here of these archetypes, but also very interesting that you don't have how this tends to work in a culture and in a religion that does not have these strict dichotomies between male and female. And also between black and white, and between colonizer and those in servitude or in slavery. So there's a way in which the feminine here acts as a subversive element. It actually turns everything upside down on its head, while at the same time, retaining the qualities that we associated with it. Love, sexuality, beauty, but also, darkness, rage, revenge, and also the independence and protectiveness that are kind of qualities that may in some regard overlap. And we don't see the underworld association with these particular loa, which that tends to have to do with the Gede group. But nonetheless, we see this embodiment of femininity and how it can be. And it's interesting because the revolutionaries used that particular feminine energy, supposedly in their right, in order to gain their strength. So there's a knowledge there that their power comes from that dark feminine place. And the dark feminine, as scary as it can be, again, like anything, when kept in balance, doesn't have to be scary. It can be a source of strength. It can be a source of self-authenticity and self-independence and feeling that, no, I don't need, obviously we do need others in one sense, but my identity and who I am and what I do with my life is not reliant on others. With that, I'm going to stop for now. But I do want to say thank you very much to my patrons. If you want to visit patreon.com/Chthonia and become a patron to support my work, that would be very much appreciated. And also, if you want to see all of my work, which includes this podcast, but also my publications, other services, links to other services that I have at liminalreiki.com, other places, please go to chthonia.net. Everything, the whole world of what I do is contained there. And if you want to follow me on social media, it's Chthonia on YouTube, Chthonia Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, 2 words on Facebook, 1 word on Instagram, and on Twitter as well. And with that, I want to thank you again for listening, and we'll see you with the next episode.